Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, I am joined by Mark Metz. Mark is a good friend of mine, and he used to work with abused children in a home run by the state. And I wanted to have a conversation with Mark about his experience with abused children and how he thinks COVID and the culture in general will be affecting children and their minds moving forward in their life. So, RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. And don't forget, he's extremely racist. So give him a high five from me. Ha! Libertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find this show. Conflicts of Interest with Kyle Anzalone. Liberty Weekly with Patrick McFarland. And Don't Tread on Anyone with Keith Knight, as well as the Scott Horton Show. We also have a lot of great writers at libertarianinstitute.org. There's Jim Bovard and Patrick McFarland and Will Porter. I'm sorry, I'm still drinking my coffee this morning, if you can't hear it in my voice. But libertarianinstitute.org, we do our best to cover all of the news and information from Liberty's mindset so that you can get the information and how it affects you. So go to libertarianinstitute.org and check us out. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. All right. I'm here with Mr. Mark Metz. What's going on, my brother?
Not much. Thanks for having me on, Tommy.
Yeah, no doubt, dude. I realized I was sitting thinking today, I realized like we had been talking about doing this for like 2 years. And then I completely forgot about it. And so here we are 2 years later, like, okay, let's do this.
After a few reschedules, both one on my part, one on your part too. So we finally made it happen.
Yeah, we'll get there eventually. It happens. So, well,
I am not I don't have a podcast of my, well, I have a morning show, but I mean, Justin Campbell sets all that stuff up. So I have no idea what it's like on the end of like setting up interviews and stuff. Is that you just like reach out to people and are like, hey, what day you want to come on? Do you have an actual like schedule that you write down or anything? Or
I keep it what I try to do is I try to book myself a couple of weeks in advance and have at least one interview every week. And then I'll put it on like Google Calendar or some shit like that. So it'll alert me ahead of time, but I'm usually pretty good about remembering what I have scheduled for when. And so I very rarely look at my calendar, but if I do need it, it is there to help me out.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but typically I can pretty much know in my head what I got for when and all that. So I'm pretty good at remembering those things. I'm not quite old enough to have memory loss yet. So, but I'm sure that's not far away, you know. So you used to work with kids. Give us a little background about what you did.
yeah, so I was actually in school in education, which is just crazy for me to even think about now because I was studying to be one of the worst people in society. And like I knew I wanted to.
How do you feel about drag shows?
Let's just start off with a bang here. Yeah, so I knew I wanted to work with kids, so I was like, you know what, maybe I'll study to be a teacher. I was like thinking like high school, middle school, because if you get like a male teacher in like elementary, it gets a little weird, right? So I was studying education, and I was like looking for jobs to sort of like relate to the field that I was studying in. But I should say that like I wasn't like super set on the whole education degree. I was like never set on finishing college at a young age anyways, because I was terribly afraid of debt. I loved to like learn, but like learn on my own accord. So I actually hated like sitting in classes and listening to professors tell me what to do. So anyways, I'm looking for a job to relate to this field, working with kids. I see this place called, well, actually, I won't say the name of the place, but it's an organization that houses kids who have been removed from their parents' homes for a variety of things. So you have like homes, you have like all boys homes for behavioral issues. You have all girls homes. You have like girls homes for like sexual trafficked girls. There were like the developmentally disabled kids. There were SO offender home. There was a substance abuse home. So this is like a whole campus with these different like residential homes in them. And I see that, I was like, well, this seems super interesting. So I applied. I didn't think I was actually gonna get it because obviously I have like the psychology, social work degree, like preferred on it. But I got an interview, did like a panel interview with like 4 other candidates. Afterwards, I like asked the HR guy, I was like, so what is like the population of the kids of the home that I just like interviewed for? Because I didn't even say on the description. And he goes, oh, this is teenage girls. And I was like, well, shoot. I was like, I'd like to get my foot in the door, but like teenage girls definitely isn't my preference here. So I actually got a call back though a couple of days later, and he's like, so we thought that you might actually work better with like the 7 to 14-year-old boys range. I was like, oh, that'd be great. So I interviewed for that. Ended up getting that job. These kids are like I said earlier, like they've been removed from their parents' homes by the state for abuse, neglect. Like even though there was a home for like sexual offender kids, like we had kids who were also like sexually abused. So they were highly sexual for their age. Like you're a 9-year-old kid talking about women being a piece of meat. You're like, oh, this is a different world here. Like, these kids have seen some things. So yeah, I started working there part-time, going to school in the meantime. And then I realized that it wasn't like, not everyone there was like the social work degree person or the psychology degree person. Like they were kind of in my same boat. And I eventually just like dropped out of college because I was like, I think I can move up in this organization just by being a good worker, showing up and like doing good work or whatever. So I actually moved up pretty quickly. I started working there. I was like 21, moved up to like a shift supervisor position, like within a year. And then like by 26, I was actually a home supervisor of that home for the 7 to 14-year-old boys. So I was actually like running the home by like 26. In the meantime, like there were other positions that I did. Like I actually did work for 6 months in the girls' home, which was kind of a funny twist. Since that was the first one that I had interviewed for, but that was only like a short thing before I went back to the boys' home and ran that for a year. So that's kind of how I started working there.
Yeah, you've seen I mean, you've seen some pretty wild stuff and how the psychology of children are affected by the culture they grow up in. And a lot of what we're seeing, I have 5 kids. I mean, you know this, but and I have a granddaughter, and I look and I'm watching what's going on around us in the culture around, and I'm very concerned about the effect that all this propaganda and totalitarianism that we see, especially since COVID, affects children. Like, can you speak to that a little bit and what it is that you have probably a little more expertise on speaking on? Because I think it's easy for us to look at it and go like, that children aren't going to react well or be, conducive with the environment of
everybody in their life being masked for the first, 5 years of their life. Like, this is going to affect their relatability and their ability to have interpersonal relationships. How do you think this is moving forward and affecting the youth that have grown up in this environment in the last few years?
So I am actually thankful for this. I left my position, that organization. I guess I still worked like overnights at that organization. I left it in January of 2020, so I didn't have to be a supervisor during COVID. And I knew I would have been like, they would have been like bringing me into Zoom meetings and telling me to make my staff and the kids like wear masks more strictly and whatever, because I would not have like followed through with that as a supervisor. But yeah, to the overall question, let me start here. Like, as someone who was, I guess you could say I was first like normie, conservative, constitutional conservative when I first started working there. And then I started calling myself a libertarian towards the end of my time there. Like, obviously, like parental rights are like a big thing, like in both of these circles, right? And like we're proponents of parental rights, but I saw the worst of parents, and these kids absolutely should not have been living in these like environments. However, they come and they're living in our homes, our residential homes, amongst other kids who have seen sort of the same things that they have. So like, just examples of what these kids would see, like you'd have a single mom who would have like a boyfriend come over who hated her kid, and he would either physically abuse her or have sex with his mom, like right in front of him. So, I mean, these kids are like witnessing these things. I mean, the mom would just enable it. Like, so one of the reasons that the state would like finally remove these kids is because the mom wouldn't break up with the boyfriend who was abusing the kid on the side, or the mom could have even known. So that's just an example of the chaotic environment of what these kids come from. Some of them are even worse. You would see, I mean, I saw very early on what the sort of groomer thing that's kind of come to a head now, where the boys that we would get who would have like these sexual issues, who would be like way too advanced in like different terms and whatnot, would come from homes that had two gay dads. Like, this was a thing that we saw. There were times we would like point it out to the therapist, and there was actually one time where we were actually accused of being homophobic because we expressed some concern over the relationship between a foster dad and the kid when you'd come and do like on-site visits. With like, there's something inappropriate going on here. So what happened was, related to your question, they're coming from chaotic environments where there was no structure, there was grooming. And what we are seeing now is that whole environment is basically out in society, right? Like, it's accepted on a TV screen, it's accepted in school now, to where all of our kids that are like growing up are somewhat subjected to what these kids who used to be more like exceptions to like bad parental environments, like we're seeing it now on a grand scale. And like I'm afraid to see where this goes. And what's even more devious is there was always a dividing line between sort of the on the floor workers, like what I was during my time working there, and the therapists. So the therapists and even like the kids, like social workers and whatnot, that they would be on one side, and the people who actually were like working in the home with the kids for the most of the time, the line was like the therapist wanted to enable, I guess, or they didn't like us using words like discipline and structure and all these things. Like, they were wanting to get down into like the psychology of the kid, whatever. Like, this is like a 9-year-old kid, and the therapist is like talking to the kid and is like, well, how does that make you feel? Like, the kid's gonna BS her, right? Like, she's not gonna get an honest conversation with a kid, but she's thinking that the kid doesn't even know with a kid.
The kid doesn't.
Yeah,
even
he
how
doesn't
they
know
feel.
either. You're right.
Yeah, they don't have any way of
So-
articulating this, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I can look back, on my life, right? And there's, everybody has trauma of some sort that clings onto them, and
Mhm.
you look back, and I still to this day can't articulate like how certain things make me feel. And so a lot of times that comes out as anger and bitterness, and then that's not good for the kid, right? Because then that's how you end up with like school shooters and stuff like this, because all they do is brood in their anger and their bitterness and their resentment, and they have no healthy outlet. So yeah, that's definitely not the way you want to do it. You have to talk to the child on their level.
Yeah. And so much of society is like on a whole is like taking the view or the philosophy of a therapist in this case, where it's like, well, let's ask the kid how they feel and then let's like proceed from there, as opposed to setting the environment first, setting the structure first, and kind of like intervening when necessary. So like there was a lot of violent, I guess you could say, like physical violence in these homes. So we were actually trained to go to physically intervene if we had to, like if a kid's beating the shit out of another kid, or even like beating the shit out of a staff. I got in trouble a few times because we would have a kid like look at one of our female staff and be like, I'm about to like grab your boobs or whatever. And like I intervened there. Like he hasn't actually initiated this contact, but him just saying that was enough for me to like intervene if I have to. And so I would get in trouble because technically he hadn't acted upon the violence yet. And you see this, obviously you see this in libertarianism, right? But you see it on a grand scale too, to where it's like, well, on one hand, the left, we'll just say the left says words are awful, but on the other, they're like, well, grooming isn't word, like grooming is only a physical act, it's not words. And it's like, no, that's absolutely false. Like a teacher like getting up and talking about her sex life with her girlfriend in front of her students is absolutely grooming. Like she doesn't have to actually have to engage in any sort of like physical action there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense, because what you're doing is you're easing them into the acts, right? And this is why people have such an issue with this transgender ideology. And then we can separate the ideology from the individuals that may have some sort of, mental issue, that have some kind of identity crisis, and, like a Blair White or those types of people. Like, I don't have an issue with these types of people, like whatever, but they're not trying to force their lifestyle down other people's throat. It's the act of forcing a lifestyle down people's throats. And, the left will say, well, the right forces their lifestyle down people's throat. And it's like, I can kind of see what you're saying, but it's like, where conservatives come from is like, don't tear down a fence until you know why it was built in the first place. Right. And so when the right is like, yeah, this is a Christian nation, it's because there's like this semblance of structure that occupies that space. And when you tear down that fence of structure and that moral fence, then it's chaos. Ooh, shit, just hit my mic. It's chaos. And so when you have that chaos, then you have all these competing interests fighting and coming at it. And so there's all these perversions trying to form their own structure that in a lot of ways are immoral, and moving children and the family into this direction of narcissism and sexuality that kids are not ready for mentally.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, like to your question about like the masks, I do think that they did make the kids wear.
I had forgot all about
mask,
that. We went down another road.
Yes. I realized your first question, the initial question, I was like, I probably didn't even answer that at all, but hopefully there was something interesting in there.
No, we're fine. Like, I wanted to get to this subject eventually, so we're fine.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, I don't know what about like the mask thing is. Kids wearing masks just pisses me off. Like I don't know, don't know what else to say to that. And I think that it's
Do you
it's a
view it as, do you think this is like, because I worry about the damage being done to the psyche of the child, especially young children, like 2-3 years old. Like one of the things that pissed me off is I saw a child wearing a mask that obviously it was 2-3 years old, barely walking. It obviously its mother chose the mask for the child, and it said mask or die. And I was like, what are you telling this kid? Like that's damaging. That's abuse, if you ask me. It's psychological abuse, you know. And so I found that real concerning. It really pissed me off when I saw that.
I think there's so one of the things that's talked about when we talk about differentiating like right and left or whatever is the right believes in hierarchy and the left doesn't, which isn't completely true. Like the left certainly has their own hierarchies, but it's not natural. It's manufactured hierarchy, right? So we talk about structure a lot, like within these homes I would work in, and it would be kind of like a conflict between staff, like how, like the best way to sort of like set up a structure. So if I'm like talking about how a kid needs to live, or these kids definitely need to be like within a more structured environment, but I'm anti like mask, another staff might be like, well, that's like a rule that we have. So isn't it like against your whole like idea of like setting up a structure that you're just allowing them to neglect this one rule? And I think what we see here is you have the left setting up their own like structures are completely inverted. Like what's an example? Like, what is the term that Sam Francis talks about? Anarcho-tyranny, right? Like so you've got you got riots in the streets, which is like super, like a lot of these rioters are wearing masks, but they're looting stores, right? So they're following one rule, but they're like breaking all the ones that actually like create a genuinely ordered society. So when I view like a kid wearing a mask in this home, it's mostly the staff who's like strictly like enforcing that rule, who's allowing these kids to get away with like beating up on each other or even like talking super inappropriately to the other staff because their values are super inverted and they're not like the same as someone who actually values genuine order.
Well, and you know, my dad told me once, it was right around the time I turned 18 years old. I graduated high school. I graduated when I was 17, but I mean, it was right in that general time frame. And I was talking to my dad one time and he goes, you know, the hardest thing for me to learn raising you was that you do as I do, not as I say. Right. So you have this idea, this thing that you're witnessing when you're involved with other people's children, which ultimately that's what you were, involved with other people's children. You're seeing them manifest what they witnessed. Right. So they're acting out what they knew. And so it's at some degree, you can't take it out on the kid, right? Because it's not the kid's fault. They are just a manifestation of the environment that they were raised in. And that's what worries me about society today, is I look at what society is manifesting. I look at the cultural norms that are being put in the faces of children, whether you're talking about the hypersexualization or the totalitarian like masking and you know, just follow the science and the religion of scientism, you know, and I'm witnessing these things and I'm like, these children don't have a chance if they don't have parents that are willing to speak out and step outside of these guidelines that have been manufactured from those on high, you know, from the media and from these personalities, these elites in Washington, D.C., and even in some of these states. These children are being formed and shaped into this. And this is why the right has such a problem with the drag shows at schools, or the kid-friendly drag shows. It's because it is inside of like their culture, their town, and this is going to manifest and then pollute the minds of their children. And so they're going to have to struggle with their children to keep their children on the straight and narrow. And so the right sees what's happening and how the kids are being influenced, and that those influenced kids are then influencing their kids, right? It's like I grew up in a home where my parents, they smoked dope when I was small, but they quit whenever their companies instituted drug testing, right? I was still young at the time, maybe like 7, 8 years old, right? But when I was in junior high, one of my best friends, his mom and brothers were manufacturing LSD and using him as a guinea pig and testing it out on him. So it was frying his brain, but I was being influenced by him because I was spending so much time with him. So therefore it was a much easier path for me to take, even though I didn't have that influence at home. The people I was spending majority of my time with were doing these things. And it was very much easier for me to follow that path and then push against my parents, right? And rebel against the parents. And there's always going to be a certain amount of rebellion that a child is going to partake in against their parents. You have to choose culturally what you're willing for that rebellion to look like, right? And when that rebellion looks so perverted and so sexually hyper sexualized, then you understand that there are damaging effects to that, whether it's the sterilization of perfectly healthy children or pregnancies or STDs or any of these number of things that children are being exposed to. And so when you're going out there and you're speaking out against this stuff, it's not because you're homophobic or transphobic or any of this. It's because you're trying to protect your children. Sorry, that was kind of a rant. No,
that was good. The whole do as I say, not as I do, and then also rebellion kind of like sparked an example in my mind that might relate. So just to like paint a picture of like what something might happen, like working in this home, like what might go down. So we're like all sitting, we have like 10 kids, right? And we're all sitting down for dinner. Like these kids lived in these homes, like they slept there and everything. We fed them. We were their glorified parents. They had like 17 parents, which isn't great, but it was better than their parents at home. And the weirdest things that seem super small to us would like set a kid off. Like we have burgers instead of PB&J for dinner. Like any kid might like complain about that, but most kids aren't going to hear that and then start throwing chairs around and flipping tables because he hates burgers. This is something that would commonly happen in this home. And what we were instructed to do in this certain situation was, well, this kid's freaking out and it's against basically the state bylaws, whatever, that we can't physically intervene. And as I said earlier, until he actually hits someone else or starts harming himself. So flipping furniture, throwing things around the house, it technically wasn't enough for us to physically intervene. So the thing is, people would like remove all the other 9 kids out of that situation and basically let the kid have free reign. Well, that wasn't about that. But so I would actually I would break 2 rules. I would remove the kid from the situation, like kind of escort him to his room. And then I would like stand outside his room while the other kids were able to eat dinner in peace, hopefully, because they had, in my opinion, earned the right to have the home to themselves, not the kid who's like wreaking havoc, right? But I broke this other kid's freedom of movement, and I was also, quote, technically like secluding him in his room. But what I would tell my staff is like, look, I'm not going to tell you to do what I'm doing in this situation because I'm not going to tell you to like break the rules. But I have sat across from CPS before, and if they ask me why I did this, then in my mind, I have like rational reasons to justify like why I did it or whatever. And I've actually convinced CPS of this. CPS is obviously as awful as what we assume it is, but you can rationalize these things and be like, look, I was creating a safe environment for the 9 kids because one kid decided to go off. And I think what we see in society is more of we're trying to So the libertarian, I don't want to talk about libertarian. People talk about like removing kids from public schools, and I think that's all necessary. But the thing is, that's fleeing in a situation we shouldn't have to flee, right? We're removing the mass majority kids because one kid is deciding to like transition and is creating chaos in that environment where they're like bringing in these other kids. If we don't like remove them, they're going to also fall in line because kids are obviously like impressionable, and that's what we're seeing right now. Is if I had let that kid sort of like wreak havoc in the home, like two other kids are going to jump up and start throwing furniture around too. And this is what we see, especially in like public schools. Like one kid decides that he is a girl now, so then his friends also decide that they're a girl, and instead of having some sort of, I'm not saying we have to remove the kid who thinks he's a girl, but there needs to be like some sort of like check in place where it's like, okay, we don't want the majority of kids like subjected to this, because it is a mental defect. I mean, I'm sorry if I get you in trouble for saying that, but this is like a mental
I don't
disease.
get in trouble. This is my podcast. Fuck them motherfuckers.
There we go. Like this is a disease, and I think we should like treat it accordingly. I don't know what accordingly is necessarily, but it's not enabling or promoting or grooming it, right?
Right. You know, when you're telling that story, the first thing I think of is like, just show the kid how ridiculous he looks and just go in there and start flipping tables with him. You know, just start throwing shit.
Yeah, I mean, that is
like turn on Devil Driver, Another Night in London, right? Let's start a riot, Another Night in London, you know, like, and turn that on and have all the kids flipping tables and just like, yeah, fuck it. You know,
this was a tactic utilized from time to time. Like sometimes it was like, you know what, well, I'm going to flip a chair too, but it worked and it didn't work. It's kind of a,
well, I just remember
a double-edged sword.
One time, one of my kids got really mad and about something, and he broke one of his toys. So I started grabbing toys and just breaking them. Yeah, let's break them all. Fuck it. You don't need any toys. Yeah. You know, and he's like, wait. I'm like, quit throwing a fucking fit then, you idiot.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, man, that's hard. You know, but we see this in public. And this is something like, you know, I was talking to my buddy Matthew Ho the other day. We were texting back and forth about that situation he had with that activist about calling him a transphobe. And I know Matt. Like I know he's on the left, but he's a reasonable guy. I mean, he's a veteran who suffered from PTSD. He overcame PTSD, and he works with veterans curing PTSD. He's a reasonable guy. So I know I could like talk to Matt, and we had a great conversation about that. And I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but my point is, like, when you're even there are people on the right that are throwing fits and throwing chairs over and throwing over tables. Right. And, we have to find, there has to be a way. It's what Jung called being possessed by the anima. Right. So it's like the devouring mother has overtaken your mentality. The only way to overcome that devouring mother and have that conversation and settle that is to be the compassionate but strong father, right? And that's what you have to be, and that's what you have to become in order to do that. And there's plenty of I remember one time, my ex-wife was yelling at me over something. Right now, every time in the past she had started yelling at me, I'd be like, look, bitch, you divorced me. You lost the right to yell at me and hang up. You know, like that was like the way I handled it. Like, you know, you forfeited your right to scream at me, bitch. You know, but this one time I decided I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kill her with kindness. Right. And so I got strong and stern in my tone, but at the same time, I stayed kind in my words, and she ended up hanging up the phone on me. Right. So I called her back like 2 minutes later. I said, I'm sorry. I think we lost connection. I'm in the store right now. And her tone completely changed. It was like defeat. And I was like, oh shit, this shit works. You know, like kill them with kindness kind of deal. Yeah. And you have to learn that when these, like this kid throwing a fit or these activists throwing fits, they're not mad at you. They're mad at what you symbolize. You're a symbol.
Yeah.
These personal attacks on you aren't really personal attacks on you. They're going after what you symbolize and what you represent.
How dare you be stable? Yeah.
Right. And the more stable you are and the less you are to give over to your emotion, because if you give over into your emotion, then they win. Then you're talking their language, and they can defeat that. They know how to defeat that. But if you can stay centered, grounded, and stern and firm in your foundation, they can't defeat that. Right? Eventually, they have nowhere to go other than to just stop. And that's what you have to do. And when you're dealing with these kids, you have to do that. And we're going to have to do that on a political level with these grown children that feel like emotion is the most important thing. No, emotion is not the most important thing. Emotion is it causes you to do stupid things when you get overly emotional, and we need to reel back that emotion, and we need to we're living now in a time of the devouring mother, to where everything is hyper emotional and hyper matriarchal. And we need to reel that back in and be real patriarchs that stand firm in belief and bring the woman to task and say, you have a place, but this is not your place.
Yeah. A few things come to mind there.
And I am misogynist for saying that.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's funny because this field is dominated by women that I worked in. So, I mean, a lot of times it'd be like me and 3 other girls working on a shift. And most of these girls are like right out of college. They're like early 20s, mid 20s. And I worked with a lot of girls who Bernie Sanders loving lefties, girl power, all this stuff. But whenever shit hit the fan, like they became the biggest proponents of males. And you would hear them say things like, we need a male on staff, stuff that you wouldn't think would come from their mouths. But there was obviously a need for a strong male protector person to be on staff. And even like my own growth as a man, like was helped by working in this place, because like I entered working here. I mean, I'm still a pretty reserved person, but like I was pretty shy and feeble, and like working here, like you're forced and you're either going to leave or you're forced into action. Right. So I actually like became pretty confrontational at times, and like you said, stable. I had a supervisor who he sometimes derided me too much for being the protector. He's like, you're gonna have to let like people figure this out on their own, which he was correct about that at times, but like I couldn't help it. But when you're talking on the political realm as well, like I thought of, have you followed this Gavin McInnes story?
No, I did see that Owen Benjamin kind of put out the text that we're going back and forth between him and Gavin. I don't know what Gavin's purpose was. I don't pay attention to Gavin that much. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ostensibly like Gavin's supposed to be on the right. And if the story Owen is giving is true, then it's pretty bad. Like obviously we're seeing all these like FBI raids of homes and stuff. And so Gavin faked one of his own. You might ask like why he would do that. He says it was a prank, but in this environment, and then you're just giving in to the chaos.
Yeah,
it makes you
look like a grifter. It makes you look like a grifter,
right?
Whether you are or not,
right?
And so, yeah.
And it's. I mean, to be honest, it's kind of feminine energy if you're going to fake something like that. Like you're giving into the whole devouring mother spirit there. I feel like,
right. You are correct. I agree with you on that. Yeah, but I don't know all the details. I did see the clip where he's like, "Oh, you talk to my attorney. I'm on the air," and then he walks off. And but I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it because I'm like, I don't know. He's been involved in so much crap.
True. This is why I don't like protests either. I mean, I feel like that's also feminine energy. Like,
yes,
even I mean, January 6th obviously isn't what the left or the mainstream cracks it up to be, but at the same time, like I'm not a super fan of like January 6th because you're playing the left's game.
Well, I mean, it's like there's a spirit of crowds, right? Like there's a spirit that overtakes a crowd. Like if you've ever been to a concert, you can feel it. Like you feel the energy in the arena. Like if it's hostile and aggressive and angry, you don't want to be in the mosh pit. But if everybody's having a good time, you can tell everybody's having a good time. You jump in the mosh pit. Hey, people are helping you up when you fall, blah, 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 blah. You know, you might get a busted lip and hey man, you're all right. Yeah, let's go have a beer. Like there's a spirit that overtakes a crowd. Right. And so you have to be able to be aware of what's going on around you and not get wrapped up in that spirit, you know, and that takes discipline. That takes, you know, that takes personal knowledge of oneself in order to do that. And so when you're working with these children in this environment that y'all were in, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to teach them how to overcome these spirits and these emotional, you know, this emotional intake. But now the culture is so like, no, your emotion is all that matters. It's all about what you feel. Right. Okay, well, yeah. I feel like I saw there was a story yesterday. Some dude beheaded some young mother publicly in the middle of California. You know, and like, yeah, I feel like taking a sword out in public and beheading someone. Now I'm basically ISIS. You know, like, I mean, that's not masculine, right? Like violence is only masculine when violence is necessary. And this is why the majority of fatherless homes, the child is physically abused because that mother is tapping into her animus, which is the tyrannical father, and beating that kid because she feels like that's the only way to show masculine, that aggression is the masculinity that child is missing. But no, like if you have a stable home with a mother and a father, that masculine energy is not toxic. What makes it toxic is tapping into the tyrant. And so the tyranny of masculinity is toxic, but masculinity in itself is not toxic. It is stable. It is emotionally set and foundational and grounded, and it is disciplined, right? And so when people are talking, when I hear feminists talking about toxic masculinity, I'm like, yeah, you're talking about single mothers raising boys. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's where that toxic masculinity comes from.
We brought up Owen Benjamin earlier, and there was a stream where he kind of got into like the devouring mother spirit. And so I mean, I know you would say this too, but men are to blame just as much as women for women becoming like this devouring mother, right? Because we've either not become masculine, men on a grand scale, or it's like the wrong type of masculinity. So if a woman has a man who isn't masculine at all, or he is expressing his quote masculinity by like not being loyal to the mother, by cheating on her or whatever, there's almost like Owen talked about like this revenge spirit within the mother. Is like, okay, well, if you have a son with me, I'm going to feminize your son as a way of like getting my revenge, which seems pretty sick, but this seems to be the case. Like I know a few families, I guess, I don't even know if you can like call them families, where the man has not been loyal to the wife, and the poor son like suffers in many ways, but it suffers because it's mostly the woman raising him, and she's raising the kid in this sort of like feminine way, which comes about, I mean, obviously partly naturally because she's a woman raising a boy, and a boy needs a man in his life, but also as a sort of revenge against her husband or her boyfriend for going out on her all the time.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting thing to think about.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a healthy way to be a man, and there's a way to treat a woman. And if you're being abusive, neglectful, or any of these things, you're acting in a selfish way. And that boy looks at it as like, well, men are inherently selfish, and this is how a man treats a woman. And that's, again, it's that do as I do, not as I say type of mentality. It's like people want to tell kids, well, do as I say, not as I do, but that's not how kids act. They act out what they see. If you watch an infant, they're going to try to act out what they see with you, right? They're going to mimic you, not mock, but mimic you, right? And if you look at like even you can see this with like podcasting, especially like some of these younger podcasters that are coming up. They try to sound like Dave Smith, or they try to sound like Joe Rogan, or they're trying to sound like someone that they've been listening to for the last like 5 years. And so they're trying to mimic that, because they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to work their way through it. And they see the success, or they see this activity, and they equate that activity with success. And so they're trying to mimic that and become that, embody that archetype that they're witnessing in front of them. And when you're dealing, like in your situation where you're dealing with a lot of abused kids, there's an archetype of abuse, right? There's this petty tyrant, this Stalin-esque Hitler type figure that was the head of their home that tyrannized their life. And they're like, that's how you do this. That strength, I have to overcome that strength, right? If you talk to a man who's 30 years old and you're like, I'm going to kick your ass, but he was beat, and when he was 4 years old, he was getting his ass kicked by a 28-year-old man, he's gonna be like, what the fuck can you do to me? Right? Because like he's internalized that tyrant and said, like, you don't have the tyranny in you that I have in me. I can unleash more tyranny, more pain than you can, because I've experienced it my entire life, right? And that becomes like the reality of their persona and how they interact with the world.
Yeah. This was one of the things that was so important in this job, is when the times that we did have to like physically intervene, kids like beating up another kid or whatever.
Use a cattle prod.
We always
fucker.
Yeah, we always had to set up a time like after the whole situation was diffused and process with that kid, right? So our like physical intervention, I mean, it's like an 8-hour training that we had to go through, so it's not like we're just like grabbing and like putting the kid in a half Nelson or whatever. But right. it might bring the memories of like time that they were like physically handled or whatever in the home in a negative way. So it's very important to have that like processing time afterwards to be like, okay, do you know like why I had to do this, in order to sort of like set a divider between what happened in the home versus why we had to physically intervene in our situation.
Right. And
there was one kid.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's just, I mean, talking about like being an example for him. There's one kid who absolutely like hated me my entire time. Like he was at his home, because I mean, I structured the home and I didn't let him get away with the things that he wanted to get away with. But there was a time where I like left that home and worked in the girls' one for a little bit. And I came back to visit some staff one day after like a couple of months. And that kid sees me. It was like the first time he'd see me since I left. And I was like, oh, there's what's his face. I wonder if he still hates me. But he goes, oh, Mr. Mark, I'm so happy to see you. And he like runs up and like gives me a hug. And I was like, well, what? Well, what is this? You're supposed to hate me. Yeah. Like, well, he doesn't hate you. Like, you provided structure in his life, so he actually probably misses that structure.
He respects you. He just hated the discipline, because the discipline hurts, right? It's like going through boot camp. It hurts. It sucks. And you hate your drill sergeant until you graduate, and then you love that son of a bitch. You know, those days. Yeah. You know, and so, but no, I was gonna say, oh shit, I can't remember what I was gonna say. Man, I don't know. Popped in my head and it's gone. Must not have been important. Must have been a shitty take.
It's probably the most important part of this conversation.
No, I was gonna say, you have to learn to. My mom and I were talking about this earlier, and it's like, if you punish a kid out of judgment, in a punitive manner, that's abuse. But if you punish a kid,
Yeah.
if you spank your child out of love and compassion and in corrective reasoning, that's not abuse. There's a fine line, right? Like, how are you approaching the subject? And one thing I always made sure I did, I hated spanking my children, always hated it. So I always, after I would spank them and they would calm down, I would bring them aside and I would tell them, okay, why did you get spanked? What happened? Like, okay, so now I'm not judging you. It's not punitive. It is a corrective measure. It is to change your habit, not to be a tyrant. And I mean, my spanking my children is probably like 2-3 swats at the most. I never just you fucker and chase them around the yard or anything, so but if you take that time, just that extra time to sit them down and say, okay, why did you get in trouble? Like, what does this mean? It makes a difference. Now, I had my youngest son, like, spanking him didn't work. I had to get creative. I had to think of other ways to discipline him and correct his actions, because just spanking him, it did nothing. Got to a point he was like 7 and I was spanking him. I'd get home in the afternoon at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And it felt like I would spank him 5-6 times before he went to bed, almost every day. And I was like, man, I hate this. It made me feel horrible, right? I felt like a piece of shit, because I'm not trying to beat my kid. Like, I'm trying to correct his behavior and set him in a direction. So what I ended up doing is I started implementing PT, and I took what I learned out of basic training and the military time I had, and I just started getting the push-up position. And I'd make him sit there until he hit muscle failure. He would just collapse. I'd get the fuck back up, and I would just go full drill sergeant, and he loved it. But it straightened him out. I remember there was one time he came up to me and he goes, "Dad, we haven't done PT in a long time." And I was like, "Well, why is that?" He goes, "Well, I haven't been in trouble." I was like, "When's the last time you were in trouble?" And he's like, "I don't remember." And I think it had been like 2 months. He hadn't been in any trouble. And this was an amazing breakthrough for me, because this kid was constantly in trouble. And like, suddenly when I implemented like this physical, activity into his life, no more trouble. Suddenly he was fine. Like, and he started correcting him, and it started making his habits different. And so every child is different. But no, to finish that story, I was like, well, you don't have to get in trouble to do push-ups. You know that, right? It's like, you just go do push-ups
right now if you want.
Well, you just do
Is
push-ups.
this your
anytime you want.
is this your middle child by chance?
No, it was my youngest.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I had
I
a middle child. My dad,
I had 5 kids by 2 wives.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so my middle child for my first marriage was my second, because I had 3 with my first wife. So that was my daughter. And then with my second wife, it was my youngest son that, there was no correcting him like through spanking or anything like that, but it was bringing forth that physical activity. But that's what spoke to him, and that's what got through to him. And he didn't hate the PT, but he hated the reason I was making him do it. And so he stopped doing the activities that were causing him to get in trouble. So therefore I didn't have to tell him to go get in the electric chair and say the mantra. I would have him chant over and over, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is looking. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite the presence of fear. Like, I would have them go through this, and he would sit there in the electric chair, just legs shaking, and it just collapsed to the ground. And I'd be like, "Don't you stop. I didn't say you were done." And, just full drill sergeant on him. And it worked. And he stopped getting in trouble. And unfortunately, his mom and I got a divorce, and therefore I wasn't in the home anymore. And it was one time after the divorce did he get in any serious trouble. And it was like right after we separated, he stole some money from the neighbor. And I was like, "Why do you need money?" And he's like, I don't know. I just wondered. I was like getting the electric chair, and, like on the phone with him. And I'm like, I'm smoking him like while I'm on the phone with him. But it was just like one of those things. And he never got in any serious trouble after. I'm sure he got, he's a little shit, he's a teenage boy. He's 17 now. And so I'm sure he's been in plenty of trouble, but nothing that was like, nah, whatever. And he's my little entrepreneur, man. He's like all about being an entrepreneur and doing his shit. And I'm like, go for it, boy. Do your thing, man.
Yeah.
You got my full support. He would get in trouble at school for competing with the candy machines. He would go to the store and buy candy, bring it to school and sell the candy, and kids would buy the candy from him instead of the candy machines. So he would get in trouble. I'm like, hey,
Dude,
man.
I'm a teacher. I'm like, look, man, you get an A. There's like,
there are worse things.
nothing to do with the
selling.
assignment.
Trust me, when I was his age, I was selling drugs. So,
No, I ask if he is your middle child because I'm the middle. I got two brothers, and I was in the middle. And my dad says about me that I was the only one whose will he wasn't able to bend or break. I can't remember his exact words, but I'll give him credit. He found a way to motivate me in a different way, in different ways. I don't even think he fully realizes it yet, or now. I was actually reminded of this because I read your competitive advantage story on your Substack the other day about basketball.
Yeah.
And I was in sixth grade, and this was like my first year playing basketball, and my very first practice. Like I didn't know what a suicide was until I had run my first one, and I decided I thought I'd never want to run them again. I get home from practice, and I was like, I can't do this, Dad. Like my legs hurt so bad, I'm dying. Like I want to quit after like one day or whatever.
Right.
And I knew, like, I saw it on his face. I was like, I knew he obviously didn't want me to quit. And he's just like, look, I'm not going to like drag you to basketball practice and tell you what to do in this situation. But if you quit this now, like you will be quitting everything for the rest of your life. But like made me stay awake all night long just thinking about like I'm gonna be quitting everything for the rest of my life if I quit this one or quit basketball in sixth grade. And like that motivated me, and I played basketball throughout high school because I didn't want to be known as a quitter the rest of my life.
Right.
And then like fast forward to like my freshman year, I'm complaining about playing time, and there are a lot of parents now who will complain right along with their kid, right? It's kind of like the whole like grades thing. Like they go to the teacher and be like, why are my kids' grades bad? Instead of like working with the kid. But my dad was like, look, if you want to play, like dribble the basketball, and we had a long driveway up and down the driveway like every single day, and you'll be the starting point guard by next year. And so this was his way of like finding ways to motivate me. It wasn't like you said, you had to find a different way with your son. Like his were just like, look, don't be a wuss, basically. Like do the work, put in the work. If you don't, then you're going to be a quitter the rest of your life. And
yep, my dad had, my dad
still stuck with me.
I remember the best advice my dad ever gave me, and it was like something that stuck with me forever. I mean, up to this day, I remember this, and he probably told me this when I was like 12 or 13. There was I was in junior high in Houston at the time. It was my first year in Houston, and this high school kid showed up to pick up his brother, and it was after football practice, and me and my buddy were standing there talking, and this guy, he was walking, and I think he was like a sophomore or a junior in high school. We're like seventh grade. And he said, what'd you call me? I was like, I didn't even talk to you, man. I didn't call you anything. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so he accused me of calling him, the N-word and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, dude, I didn't say anything. And, I did the typical, some of my best friends are black. I don't know what you're talking about, and I was, a little scrawny fucking shit. And this kid was big, intimidating. I was like, I don't know. And he's like, I'm going to be back here tomorrow and kick your ass. Now, looking back at it now that I'm an adult, I'm like, if he wanted to kick my ass, he would have kicked my ass right there. But I told him, I was like, I'm not going back to school. I told me that. I'm like, I am not going back to school. This big black motherfucker's got to beat the shit out of me, you know? And so I'm like, I'm not going back to school. And my dad said, getting your ass kicked will never hurt near as bad as avoiding a fight. And it took me a while to figure out what he was talking about. But then there was one time in high school, I avoided a fight, and I was being a little bitch, and I avoided this fight, and it haunted me. And I was like, oh, that's what he meant. like that pride, that hit on your pride is much worse than a busted lip and a couple of black eyes, you know, like take your beating and move on with your life. You'll be all right, you know, but
Yeah.
you know, and so, yeah. And so dads do have a way of saying things sometimes where you're like, oh, okay, my bad. I misunderstood exactly what that meant, but I get it now. And so, yeah, well, we're running close. We're at an hour actually, but I wanted to hit on this because it's something I wanted to end with, because some of this stuff is a little dark. Some of the stuff we touch on. You talked about that boy that needed that discipline and gave you a hug when he saw you hadn't seen you in a while. Any other success stories any kids that you stay in touch with or have stayed in touch with you that you've made a difference in their lives, and you know, you kind of act as a mentor to them still to this day, or anything like that?
It's I don't really like actively talk with any of the kids too much. There are a few that have like added me on Facebook or whatever, so I'll make sure that they're like out of the home to add them back, because it's kind of like a conflict, even though I'm not working there, to add them while they're still there.
Right.
But I did actually, the reason I actually worked in the girls' home for a few months was
To meet a wife.
I started actually I actually started dating a staff in the boys' home that I had worked in for so long, and it was conflict of interest for us to work together. So I was the one to leave that home and go work in another one. And these were like teenage girls. I had to like completely change my approach. It was me and one other like male staff there and everything. But it was actually like last year I was going through Tim Hortons for a coffee, and I like pull up to the window, and there's one of the girls, like she was like 17 at the time, like handing me my coffee, and we had a nice little conversation for a while. And then like from what I could tell, like she went from not having much hope to, I mean, she was sort of like, it was kind of like assisted adult living is what she was in at that time, and she had a job and seemed like she was like doing well. So that was always cool to see. There was also another boy that we worked with. Like I always like took the approach, like I'm not, like a lot of staff obviously came in there and they were like, we're going to save these kids, right? And it didn't take me very long to realize like we're not saving these kids' lives, but we can plant like seeds that maybe years down the road make them go, maybe like staff Mark was like right about this one thing he told me, right? And there was one boy where it's like he wasn't like super high cognitively, but he had certain like particular interests. He loved like mechanical work. And I was like, if I ever like pull into like a mechanic to get my car fixed, and like this kiosk, the kid's name, like, and he like walks out, and I was like, oh, he'll have been like successful in life. And I think he's actually like working towards, last I heard about him, like he was actually in like a trade school or whatever, like working towards that. And I was like, well, that's really good to hear, because we, instead of like trying to, I don't know what the right word is, like get this kid interested in different intellectual things. Like he was never going to be an intellectual kid, right? But he was interested in these few things. Like we actually worked out with this kid on the interest that he had, and the fact that he like pursued that down the line was definitely a showing of like those seeds being planted, or like the different like fostering that we helped.
Very, very John Taylor Gatto way of approaching education.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's good. I mean, I'm sure, like, just what I know of you is, as well as we know each other, I'm sure you made some difference, and you know, you were able to plant those seeds, and you were able to do so in a manner that was beneficial to these kids. And you know, you hear a lot of these success stories about foster parents and stuff like that, and those kids forever calling that person, even if they're not in touch with that person, they always call that person dad or mom or whatever. So you know, I'm sure there's some good memories, and these kids have a lot of respect for you. So I'm glad you did that. I mean, that's amazing. I can't think of a better person to have done that, right? Because
I appreciate that.
You know, there's a lot of shitty people that get into this, like you were talking about, like the psychologists and stuff like that. There are a lot of shitty people and a lot of shitty points of view that these kids are up against, and having that solid male figure for the amount of time they had it, you know, with you is got to be good for them.
Yeah. There were also like, so when I transitioned to being a home supervisor for a year at the boys' home, this was my last year there. I was more like supervising the staff who were supervising the kids, right? And I also saw that end of it where it was like I get to make a difference in like these staff. Like I was still pretty young. I was 26, 27 at the time, so I was young myself, but I'm like supervising staff who some were older than me, but some were like just out of college or early 20s or whatever. And you make differences obviously as a leader of adults as well. And I've had like old staff like come to me and thank me for different things. So that's obviously been really rewarding as well, like being able to work with staff in that way. I got a Michael Staff, world's best boss, mug when I left that job. So that's always
awesome.
Cool too.
Yeah. Well, plug away. This has been fun. I'm glad my internet held up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been fine. markmetz.substack.com. Lately it's been a lot of fiction writing on there. I do write political stuff, but I'll be honest, like there's a lot of other people out there talking on podcasts and writing about like politics that I don't know that I can even like add much more to it. And I think what our sphere, if you want to call it that, is in need of is better fiction writing. I know you, Tommy, do some fiction writing as well. I think we need to like
book. I got to finish this fucking book, man. I was just texting with my buddy Gord about that before you and I got on here. I was like, dude, I got to finish doing the audio and editing, and then I'm releasing this fucking thing. I should have been done with this thing 2 years ago. So I got to finish it.
I'm looking forward to it. But I think our sphere needs to be, and our imaginations need to be enlivened. And there's only so much that like writing, talking about politics can do about that, or even like strategy, right? Like we need some good fiction out there that not only portrays like the evils of our current society, but also like uplifts like what could be a more like beautiful culture, right? And like we need stuff like this. So I've been trying that a lot with my fiction writing. I actually have been posting like really short like flash fiction pieces on there.
I'm gonna have to check it out. I didn't even know you had a Substack, so I'm gonna subscribe to it and get that.
Yeah, it's the Emergent at markmetz.substack.com. You can also find me on the Morning After Show on YouTube. It's basically a current events show that we do 7:30 Central Time every morning, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I am a co-host with, Justin Campbell. Your listeners will know him. And then
fucking red.
Daggerist, Daggerist, and also Clyde of the South on Twitter. So it's kind of a fun thing. It's more just sort of reacting in funny ways to the news. Sometimes we get serious, but it's mostly a lighthearted affair. So that's the Morning After. And then lastly, there's one more thing that we started. Other people your listeners will know are Matt Erickson, Tho Bishop, Buck Johnson, and also Justin's part of this too. We started a football podcast that is called Clock Management on YouTube. It's also a newsletter, clockmanagement.substack.com.
All right. I'll put all that stuff in there. I know I've heard Buck talk about it, but I didn't know the name of it. I haven't watched football in years. I don't even think my TV works. I have a TV. I don't know when the last time I turned it on was. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too elite for TV. I hate the fucking thing. It's like it sucks the life out of you. It like makes you like lazy and drowsy. I don't like TV. I listen to podcasts, I read, and a lot of times I'm sitting on my porch with my wife, just drinking beer and staring out into the ether, man. That's kind of my entertainment. So it's like,
no, I watch TV 4 months out of the year during football season, and I just shut it off after that.
Gotcha.
So.
Gotcha. I quit. I guess I quit watching football when Beatrix moved here, and I'd already quit watching professional football at that time. But then I was still watching college football. And when Beatrix moved here, she was like, she couldn't get into it because it wasn't rugby. It's hard to find good rugby on here in America. So we just stopped watching sports altogether. And the only time I ever catch it is when I'm at my parents' house and they're watching it. So,
yeah.
But all right, man. Well, this was fun. I got your links here to put in the show notes. So I'll put markmetz.substack.com, the morning after, and clockmanagement.substack.com. And we'll definitely do this again. This was fun. I think that,
yeah, for sure,
your experience working with children in this way is not only admirable, but it's useful for us to look at on our side, and not that left perspective of overly compassionate, sympathetic, devouring mother. And I appreciate what you bring to the table from your experience.
Oh, I appreciate that. We should change the question of the spirit of the age right now from how does that make you feel to what are you going to do, or something like that. We'll figure something out.
What are you going to do about it? How does that make you feel?
And what are you going to do about it?
Do about it?
There we go.
All right, man.
I would definitely, I appreciate you having me on.
Oh no, this was fun.
And I'd like to also, when your book comes out, I'd like to talk about like fiction writing at some point with you. I think that'd be cool.
Sure, for sure, man. We'll definitely do that. Let me get it done. Like I'm killing myself with the editing. That's what I'm doing. I keep changing the format, and I'm like, I got to stop doing this. I'll never release it if I keep doing this. But it's like, my problem is I compare myself to like Dostoevsky or to fucking Clive Barker, and not to like all these shit fucking authors that I know I'm much better than. So, so that's my problem. I'm like, I want to be the best,
Yeah.
So
I feel that.
I'm going to stop the recording, and then, we'll close it out.
If you're gonna play, scam, pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the visa they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Cause we don't even need them, we'll never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedom. Fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them, we'll never celebrate the tyrants that